Chapter 9. Praise. Then the Venerable Subhuti said to the Bhagavan, "Bhagavan, this Prajñāpāramitā is a mere name. Its name is not mentally perceived as such, insofar as what is called a name simply consists in a sound, nor is Prajñāpāramitā itself either found or mentally perceived. Prajñāpāramitā is exactly the same as a name, and a name is exactly the same as Prajñāpāramitā. Neither of the two things is found or mentally perceived. So, Bhagavan, after realizing Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, why will the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Maitreya discuss this Prajñāpāramitā using these very terms, words, and syllables in precisely this location?" The Bhagavan replied to the Venerable Subhuti, "It is because Subhuti, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Maitreya, will awaken with the conviction, physical forms are not permanent, not impermanent. Physical forms are not fettered and not liberated. They are absolutely pure. Likewise, he will awaken with the conviction, feelings, conceptions, conditioning factors, and consciousness are not permanent, not impermanent. Feelings, conceptions, conditioning factors, and consciousness are not fettered and not liberated. They are absolutely pure. For this reason, Subhuti, after the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Maitreya realizes Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, he will discuss this very Prajñāpāramitā using these very terms, words, and syllables in precisely this location." At this, the Venerable Subhuti said to the Bhagavan, "Ah, Bhagavan, this Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure." The Bhagavan said, "Subhuti, Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because physical forms are completely pure. Likewise, Subhuti, Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because feelings, conceptions, conditioning factors, and consciousness are completely pure. Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because the non-arising, non-ceasing, non-defilement, and non-purification of physical forms are completely pure. The same is true for feelings, conceptions, and conditioning factors. Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because the non-arising, non-ceasing, non-defilement, and non-purification of consciousness are completely pure. Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because space is completely pure. Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because physical forms are free of stains and free of apprehending. In the same way, Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because feelings, conceptions, conditioning factors, and consciousness are free of stains and free of apprehending. Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because space and an echo are inexpressible, inexpressive, and free of mental perception. Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is completely pure because it is not stained by anything that is a stain or a non-stain." In response, the Venerable Subhuti said to the Bhagavan, "Ah, Bhagavan, any noble son or daughter who comes to be even within earshot of this Prajñāpāramitā will profit greatly. How much more so those who take it in, keep it in mind, chant it, master it, pass it on, teach it, expound it, explain it, and recite it. They will have no eye disease, no ear disease, no nose disease, no tongue disease, and no body disease. They will not become confused and will not die through taking poison. They will have many thousands of gods at their back following them from behind. Wherever a Dharma teacher who is a noble son or daughter discusses Prajñāpāramitā on the 8th, the 14th, or the 15th day, he or she will earn a tremendous amount of merit." In response, the Bhagavan said to the Venerable Subhuti, "So it is, Subhuti, so it is. Subhuti, those noble sons or daughters will have many thousands of gods at their back following them from behind. Many thousands of gods will come to that place, all wishing to hear the Dharma. They will safeguard, defend, and protect the Dharma teacher who is discussing this Prajñāpāramitā. Why so? Because Subhuti Prajñāpāramitā is a jewel unsurpassed in the world of gods, humans, and asuras. Hence, Subhuti, a noble son or daughter, will earn a tremendous amount of merit in connection with it. Nevertheless, Subhuti, while this profound Prajñāpāramitā is being written, taken in, kept in mind, chanted, mastered, passed on, taught, expounded, explained, and recited, there will be many interruptions. Why is that? Because, Subhuti, there are many opponents to such great jewels. The greater a jewel's valued, the more formidable its opponents. And Subhuti, this great jewel, namely Prajñāpāramitā, is unsurpassed in the world and practiced for the welfare and happiness of the world. One attends to it in a manner free of dissolution, because everything is free of arising, free of ceasing, and free of emotional defilement. That is to say, Subhuti, Prajñāpāramitā does not cling to anything, does not defile anything, and does not apprehend anything. Why not? Because, Subhuti, all those things are neither experienced nor mentally perceived. That is to say, Subhuti, because it is free of mental perception, Prajñāpāramitā is unstained. Subhuti, what is unstained is just Prajñāpāramitā. To explain Subhuti, inasmuch as physical forms lack stains, Prajñāpāramitā is unstained. The same is true for feelings, conceptions, and conditioning factors. Subhuti, inasmuch as consciousness lacks stains, Prajñāpāramitā is unstained. Subhuti, if a bodhisattva mahasattva does not conceive of it even as such, then he or she goes about life in Prajñāpāramitā. However, Subhuti, this very Prajñāpāramitā, is certainly not entering or settling down in anything, not revealing or demonstrating anything, and not leading toward or leading away from anything. Then, in the sky, many thousands of gods roared with cheers of excitement while waving their garments in applause and exclaimed, "Ah, we are witnessing the wheel of Dharma being set in motion a second time on the Jambu continent." Then the Bhagavan said to the elder Subhuti, "Subhuti, this is not the wheel of Dharma being set in motion a second time, nor is there a setting in motion of any Dharma, or any causing of it to stop. It is in this way, Subhuti, that a bodhisattva mahasattva possesses Prajñāpāramitā." At this the Venerable Subhuti said to the Bhagavan, "Bhagavan, it is a great transcendent state that belongs to that bodhisattva mahasattva who has no attachment to any things. That bodhisattva mahasattva wishes to realize anuttara samyak sambodhi but does not awaken to any dharma, and hence he or she will neither set in motion a wheel of dharma nor reveal any dharma. Why not? Because no dharma is mentally perceived, nor is any dharma indicated, nor is any dharma set in motion. Why not? Because, Bhagavan, absolutely no dharma has come into being, nor will any dharma be caused to stop. Why not? Because, Bhagavan, from the beginning absolutely no things have come into being, insofar as all things are void by nature." In response, the Bhagavan said to the Venerable Subhuti, "You are right, Subhuti, you are right. The empty state neither starts nor stops. The state free of signs neither starts nor stops. The state free of inclinations neither starts nor stops. Subhuti, this sort of teaching, which is a teaching about all things, is not taught by anyone or learned by anyone or accepted by anyone. It also has not been actualized by anyone, nor is it actualized by anyone, nor will it be actualized by anyone. Also, through this Dharma teaching, no one has attained complete nirvana, will attain complete nirvana, or is attaining complete nirvana. Furthermore, through this Dharma teaching, no one has been made a venerable person." At this the Venerable Subhuti said to the Bhagavan, "Bhagavan, from the perspective of the non-existence of space, it is a non-existent transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from the mental perception of anythings, it is a transcendent state equal to the unequaled. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its absolute emptiness, it is a void transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from the mental perception of any things, it is a transcendent state that cannot be harmed. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not being mental or physical, it is a transcendent state free of any footing. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its neither coming nor going, It is a transcendent state free of inherent nature. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from conceptualizing anythings, it is a transcendent state free of speaking. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from the mental perception of any constituents underlying the clinging to existence, it is a transcendent state free of naming. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the fact that no things are moving, it is an unmoving transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of all things being ungraspable, it is an unseizable transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of having the quality of not dissipating, it is a transcendent state that is non-dissipating. Bhagavan, from the perspective of things not coming into being, it is a transcendent state that does not arise. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from the mental perception of any doer, it is a transcendent state free of doing. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the fact that no things have a self, it is a transcendent state free of a knower. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its lack of death and rebirth, it is a transcendent state free of transmigration. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from the mental perception of past, present, or future objects, it is a transcendent state beyond taming. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its causing discernment of non-arising, it is a transcendent state like a dream, an echo, a reflected image, a mirage, and a magical illusion. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not having the nature of attachment, hatred, or confusion, it is an undefiled transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of there being no mental perception of its basis, it is a non-purifying transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of space being free of stains, it is an unstained transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its going beyond thinking of anythings, it is an unproliferating transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its unmoving quality, it is a transcendent state free of developing conceits. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its remaining in the ultimate realm of things, it is an unshaken transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from any false nature of all things, it is a transcendent state free of attachment. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from conceptualizing all things, it is a transcendent state that is free of origination. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from mentally perceiving signs of anythings, it is a null transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the transcendent state of positive qualities, it is a transcendent state free of faults. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its absence of imagination, it is a transcendent state free of emotional defilements. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the pinnacle of reality, it is a transcendent state free of a sentient being. Bhagavan, from the perspective of there being no cause for the cause of all things, it is a transcendent state beyond measure. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not fixating on all things, it is a transcendent state not conforming to the two extremes. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not differentiating any things, it is an undivided transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not wishing for any levels of the disciples or Pratyeka Buddhas, it is an unaffected transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the equality of conceptualizations, it is a non-conceptual transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the true nature of things beyond measure, it is an immeasurable transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its freedom from attachment to any things, it is an unattached transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of all things being unconditioned, it is a transcendent state of the impermanent. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the true nature of things being like space, it is a transcendent state of suffering. Bhagavan, from the perspective of all things not being mentally perceived, it is a transcendent state of the empty. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not fixating upon anything, it is a transcendent state of no self. Bhagavan, from the perspective of no things coming into being, it is a transcendent state without any characteristic. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its being infinite and limitless, it is a transcendent state of all the emptinesses. Bhagavan, from the perspective of their not being mentally perceived, it is a transcendent state of the factors in awakening, beginning with the applications of mindfulness and so on. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the three gateways to complete liberation not being mentally perceived, it is an empty, signless and uninclined transcendent state. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its not being mentally perceived, it is a transcendent state of complete liberation. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the first meditative state and so on not being mentally perceived, it is a transcendent state of the 9 incremental states of abiding. Bhagavan, from the perspective of suffering and so on not being mentally perceived, it is a transcendent state of the 4 truths. Bhagavan, from the perspective of the transcendent state of generosity and so on not being mentally perceived, it is the transcendent state of the 10. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its inability to be harmed, it is a transcendent state of power. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its absolutely not being deflated, it is a transcendent state of self-confidence. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its lack of attachment or enmity toward the state of complete knowing, it is a transcendent state of experiential knowledge. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its having transcended quantification, it is a transcendent state of all the distinctive qualities of a Buddha. Bhagavan, from the perspective of all the teachings not being false, it is a transcendent state of the actual nature of the Tathagata. Bhagavan, from the perspective of all things lacking inherent nature, it is a transcendent state of self-existence. Bhagavan, from the perspective of its complete knowing of all aspects of all things, it is a transcendent state of the knowing of someone who has complete knowing, namely Prajñāpāramitā. This ends the chapter, Praise, the 9th chapter in the Noble Prajñāpāramitā, in 8,000 lines.